What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Today we are doing an update on Lunalight, an all-time favorite deck of mine, and now the Tiger is finally back. We can take a look again at a deck that started as a very roguish fun deck that became one of the best decks that we've had for the last couple of years, and it ended up getting one of its cards on the ban list. And I have to say that this is a deck that I've been experimenting with way before it became popular, so I kind of have an idea of what I want to do with the deck ever since we knew exactly what the playstyle changed to be from a fusion deck to an Xyz deck. But if you were expecting an Xyz deck, then this is not the video for you, because I will always play fusions with Lunalight. I just feel like this is how they should be played, and especially with one Tiger, trying to make the deck just an Xyz deck, I think it's very ambitious, and I don't think it's very consistent to the point of being able to do that again now. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So starting off with the monsters, we have of course 3 copies of Kaleidochick. You have to play 3 copies. She's the Armageddonite of the deck. She sends for cost, and she copies that monster's name. So the amount of times opponents will waste negates on this card is absolutely ridiculous, because they have no idea what the deck does, especially now that the deck is not popular anymore. There will be a lot of players that don't know what these cards do, so if you're planning on playing this deck, you're going to catch a lot of people by surprise, and they're going to waste disruptions on cards they shouldn't, and this is one of them, because you don't care about copying that card's effect, you just care about sending that card you want to the graveyard. And also the effect that if it's banished, your opponent cannot activate card effects during the battle phase is very important, because you do have a card that uses effects of Miracle Fusion like effects to fusion from the grave and the field by banishing the monsters, so you can basically OTK very easily with a deck, which is why I recommend playing this deck as a going second OTK fusion based build rather than a going first build, especially because not only do we have only one Tiger now, but Tenki has also been limited since then, so the consistency of the deck, especially going first, is going to be much lower than what it used. Next up, we have 3 copies of Emerald Pearl. This card on summon, it discards one of the Lunalight cards to draw a card, and if it's sent to the grave by a card effect, you can special summon one of your banished Lunalights or the ones in your graveyard. Really good card. This is another card you can summon, and the thing is that even though this might seem like a lot of normal summons, the cool thing is that there is a card you can send with Kaleidochick that helps you special summon another monster from your hand. So even if you drop both, it's not bad, because you can still get them both out of your hand, and then you can go into rank 4 Xyz, mostly being Tiger King, because of one Tenki, Tiger King is going to be even more useful than he used to be, which is a really good card going second, because not only does it give you a search, but it also negates the entire board. So yeah, these 2 cards, you need to play both of them at 3. I've seen people play less than 3 Emerald Bird, but I disagree, especially because when you have lower card amount when you want to play, because we only have one Tenki, you only have one Tiger, you need to play more monsters in order to make the deck work. Otherwise, you're playing a deck that has a very small engine with a lot of cards like hand traps and other stuff, but I don't really think that this would give you games, especially because decks are so resilient to hand traps these days, so you need to draw more of your engine in order to go off. Following that same logic, I'm playing 3 copies of Yellow Marten. If you combo this with your bird, you get a search and you get a draw, but there are also other ways to get this card to the graveyard. I'm playing Dangers in the build because this is an engine that I've been enjoying for a very long time in Lunalight. Even when I just first started playing the deck, Dangers was what I was rocking, so I think they have really good synergy with these cards, because you do have so many cards that you want to get to the graveyard. Not just these 2 monsters, but you have spells and traps that you want in the graveyard, because their better effects are where they are in the graveyard, so this is why Dangers work very well. So you don't mind playing 3 Bird and 3 Marten when you are playing Dangers, because even if you draw them, and if you just draw a Marten and you don't have a way to get it to the grave directly, when you have your Dangers, you have good chances of getting it to the graveyard, which is why this card is really important. And this card is the Zephyros of the deck. You bounce one of your Lunalight cards, you special summon this from the grave, and this is where the notorious Tiger loop became a thing and got Tiger banned in the first place, because Tiger is not a hard once per turn. Fortunately, this card is, and it gets banished after it leaves the field if it uses effect, but you're gonna use it for Xyz, so it's gonna hit the grave again, and this is the card you're going to be sending first with Kaleidochick to the graveyard. Next up, we have 3 copies of Lunalight Wolf. The reason you need to play 3 copies of this card is because with only one Tiger, you are going to need to waste one of your searches on Tiger 99% of the time, because before, when you had 3 Tigers, you were gonna draw it consistently along with Kaleidochick, so you could get away with playing like only one Wolf because you could search it. But the thing is that now you need to use those searches for the other cards, so you need to hard draw this card, because this card is the win condition of the deck, especially when you're playing going second build. This card is the absolute nuts, because when you resolve this, your opponent is most likely going to lose. Lio Dancer is a monster of a card. You're just gonna destroy your opponent, and being able to banish Kaleidochick with this card, prevent your opponent from activating anything in the battle phase, also means that they will not be able to do anything to defend themselves. For the one-offs, we have fresh off the list, the 1 Lunalight Tiger. This card, I think, at 1, it's perfectly fine. I know a lot of people probably got scared if they remember what happened back in the format where this deck dominated, and they got scared by seeing the list and seeing this card off the list, but I can assure you that it's not going to be nearly as powerful as it used to be for multiple reasons. Back then, we had 3 Tiger, we had 3 Tenki, we never saw Tiger at 1, it got from 3 to 0 right away, so the deck was very consistent, and we even had cards like Orcas and other stuff like that with Nightmare Mermaid that made this deck even more obnoxious. So I think the deck right now is going to be a really fun deck for people to toy with, but it's not something you're going to see in the top tables of a YCS or something like that. It's just not going to happen. It's not consistent enough, and if you're planning on playing the going first version, that is most likely the combo version of the deck that you're trying to make a big board, the problem with something like that is that you need to play a lot of bricks in order to make something like that happen, and there are a lot of decks right now that do similar stuff, but without needing to play so many bricks. So yeah, this deck is just not going to be as good as some people think. But this card being at 1 just gives new life to the deck. It was playable before, don't get me wrong, but this card just gives you so many more to do. The rank 4 engine of the deck is pretty much unusable without this card. You are not able to do it, but with this card, you can just keep bringing back your monsters, and by summoning cards like Redoer, you can make cards like Martin get their effects, and they get another Xyz on the field, so this card just gives the flow of the deck a little bit more. Aside from just being a fusion deck, it just gives it more to do, which is especially useful when you're trying to play a going second deck, because when you're trying to play into established boards, you need to be able to do a lot, otherwise there's just no way of trying to go second. We have one copy of Blue Cat. This is a card I just really love toying around with. It's a card that not a lot of people play, but I just really like this card. For the effect that you can double the attack of one of your monsters when it's special summoned is so useful with Lyo Dancer. It just makes her impossible to defend against, and it also has a floating effect that it's not once per turn. When it's destroyed, you can special summon a Lunalight from your deck, and when Tiger is summoned, and then you have another monster effect that people skip when they're talking about Tiger, if it's destroyed, you also get to special summon a monster back, which means you can bring back your Blue Cat, and then when it's destroyed, you get to special summon another monster. Tiger is once per turn, but it doesn't really matter now because you only have one Tiger anyways, but with this, you can basically block 4 attacks. So even if you're trying to defend, this card is really good, and now that we have Tiger, we can also Pendulum summon a deck in the deck, which is something that we could not do because of Tiger was banned, and since you can Pendulum summon, it means that you can special summon Blue Cat more consistently to use her first effect without needing to use a Perfume on to bring her back from the grave or a Serenade Dance to bring her back from the deck. You need to save those cards for the actual combo pieces, so this is why I think this card, with the inclusion of Tiger back into the deck, is just much better than before, and I really love this card, so I'm going to play it. We play one copy of Black Sheep. This card is used mainly to get back one of your wolves from your graveyard back into your hand. You can get any Lunalight by discarding this and getting it back from the graveyard. It also has an effect that a lot of people remember because of the Zodiac format, where you discard this to add a polymerization. People used to add Fusion Substitute back in the day, which I am playing polymerization in the deck because sometimes I've drawn hands that are like just this and Perfumes in my hand, and I need to have a Lunalight in the graveyard in order to bring back with Perfume to get this card to the graveyard to use its second effect to get a search. So I just need to be able to discard this card in command, even during the early game where I don't have anything in the graveyard, which is why I think playing one poly may be a brick sometimes, but I think it's worth the risk just because of what I mentioned. And polymerization, even if it's not the greatest card in this deck, you can still do some stuff and use it as an extender, so it's not the worst card. It is a decent one if you can play just to make this play possible. And the last Lunalight monster, we have one copy of Purple Butterfly. This is the monster I mentioned that makes you drawing both Kaleidochick and Emerald Bird not bad, just because you can send this with your Kaleidochick and you can banish this card from your graveyard to special summon a Lunalight from your hand, and it also has a hand effect that you can discard this from your hand, target a Lunalight you control and gains 1000 attack. Sometimes it might be useful, maybe when you're trying to play around stuff like maybe a Vanity's Fiend, you can just summon a Kaleidochick, discard this card, get your Kaleidochick 2400 and just crash with your Vanity's Fiend. There are some scenarios that this might come up, so I'm just mentioning it for future sake because you don't know what you're going to be facing, so just keep this effect in mind. You need to know all of your cards' effects, regardless of how not important they seem. Now, next up we have the dangers. Now, because we got 3 copies of Nessie, which here she is, 3 Nessie just makes it more consistent, I think that dangers are worth playing again. If we still had 1 Nessie, maybe it would not have been that good, but 3 Nessie just makes sure that you have the consistent searches whenever you need, because having the consistent dangers in your deck just makes the danger package so much more important for any type of deck, and I'm sure that we're going to see this incorporated in other strategies just because Nessie is so good. Of course, Jackalope and Tsuchinoko, because being level 3, they're just going to stay at 1 forever unless Cherubini gets banned sometime, which it might, you never know, but as long as Cherubini is around, these 2 cards are going to stay at 1. But with 3 Nessie, we have a lot of good stuff now to play as a danger package, and the thing with dangers is that you need to play either a lot of them or just play the level 3s if you're trying to play a PKBA type of deck. But if you're trying to play them in any other deck, you need to play a lot of them, otherwise they're just not consistent. So with that logic, we also play 3 copies of Mothman, and Mothman is insane in this deck because even if it gets sniped, like I said, you have so many cards that you want in the graveyard. It can be risky, then you're risking your opponent drawing hand traps, which it might happen, but because I think Nibiru is not going to be a very prevalent card during the next format, I don't think there's something that just destroys you outright completely, so you don't really mind giving your opponent maybe an Imperm or an Ash. Sometimes Imperm is completely useless against a deck like this, just like I said, because Kaleidochick stands for cost, so they're going to waste it in effects that don't really matter. So I think Mothman, even if it gets sniped, it's very, very useful, so definitely maxing out on this. We also have 1 copy of Jackalope and 1 copy of Tsuchinoko. Obviously, you're going to play these two. They're just guaranteed monsters on the field. And the last one is one copy of Bigfoot. Now, the reason Bigfoot is here is because I wanted a monster that is beast that you can special summon with Jackalope. And because of 3 Nessie, Jackalope is going to be more consistent than before, because whenever you discard Nessie, you can just get your Jackalope out of the deck. And the reason I want a beast is because of Daruma. Daruma Doll is an amazing link monster for this deck, just because it pops your own cards and your opponent's back row. It's basically a break sword for spells and traps, and you have so many cards that you want in the graveyard. You have your Perfume, you have your Serenade Dance, and after you're done comboing, you can even pop your own Tiger to get another Monster Reborn. So you need to be able to get to Daruma Doll as consistently as possible, and because of 3 skill drain, your back row decks are going to be much more relevant, so you're going to see them more often, so you need cards to break back row, because you're going to see them so much more than the previous form. Now for the spell cards, we have 3 copies of Perfume. This card is absolutely broken. It's a Monster Reborn that has a grave effect to discard a card and get a search for a Lunalight, and neither of these effects are once per turn. So no matter how many you draw of these, you can always use them. It's very useful, and it triggers dangers, which is important because you have ways to trigger dangers aside of their own effects, so that makes sense for any deck like this. So yeah, you need to get this card to the graveyard as consistently as possible, and because of that, we also play 3 copies of Foolish Burial Goods. This card is really good. It's basically 3 extra searchers, which is why Tanky at 1 and Tiger at 1, while yes it hurts, it's not completely unplayable, because if we didn't have cards like these, then the deck would be so inconsistent that it wouldn't even be worth playing. But because of cards like this, the deck, I think, even to this point, is consistent enough to be able to do what it wants to do. So these cards help a lot. We also have 1 copy of Foolish Burial. Usually you will be sending your Yellow Marten with this card to get a search. You can also send your Emerald Bird to get a special summon and use this as an extender. Very good utility card. 1 copy of Lunalight Fusion. You will be searching this most of the time with your Marten because you're playing a going second build, so you're going to use this card consistently to get another fusion material out of your extra deck or your main deck. So you can actually use this to summon your Leo Dancer even without relying on your Wolf, which is important because people that know how to play against this deck, they're going to keep some of their disruption for Wolf because they know that this is the key to get them getting destroyed in the battle phase. So this card giving you another access to Leo Dancer is actually very useful. 1 copy of Polymerization. I talked about this with Black Sheep. You just need the 1 copy to get Black Sheep to the graveyard whenever you want, even in the very early game. And again, this card is another key to getting out your Leo Dancer. It's not going to happen often. Most of the time I'm going to be summoning Cat Dancer with this card to just facilitate effects in the graveyard like Marten and Emerald Bird, but still it's a card that if you get to copy the name with Kaleidocheck, it's still very easy to get to Leo Dancer just with this. The 1 copy of Tanky. Unfortunately, Tri-Brigades made this card go to 1, so other decks are going to get the hit and the fall with them, but still, again, the deck has ways to get access to the cards it needs, even with just 1 Tanky and 1 Tiger, so it's not the biggest problem in the world. And I am maining 3 copies of Twin Twisters. Now, I think this card is exceptional in Lunalights, especially in a format with 3 skill drain. Yes, I'm going to keep mentioning that because you're going to see so many Eldlits that you won't even believe it in the next format just because of that. So you need to be prepared. And in a deck that doesn't have any inherent type of backer removal aside from Daruma Doll, which I don't call inherent just because it's a link monster, so you need to be able to get effects in order to use it. So if your opponent flips skill drain, then you need something to get rid of it. So just having the 1 Bigfoot and 3 Twisters, I think for the main deck is enough to play against stuff like that. And the discard for this deck is not a hindrance, it's a benefit. So cards like this are much better than Feather Duster because no, Feather Duster is a blowout, but you can use this card going first even as a disruption against certain decks, and just discarding cards, especially with Perfumes, your Dances, your all those dangers, it's just going to give you so much more value. So I love this card. Sometimes I even destroy my own cards with Twin Twisters if my opponent has no backer at all because I want to get cards to the graveyard to get playing, otherwise I can't, which is why this card is so good, and I would definitely max it out. Even if the format was not so control based and it was more combo based, I would still play 3 copies of this card. It's such a good card. And the last card in the main deck is 2 copies of Serenade Dance. You don't really need to max this out because unlike Perfume, this is once per turn, and the good thing about Perfume is that it also has an effect that is really good when you draw it, but if you draw this card, you need to find a way to discard it, otherwise it has literally 0 use. It cannot send itself to the graveyard. Its field effect is very relevant, giving your opponent a token, so you just need to discard this to the graveyard and get this to the grave as quickly as possible. But I would still play more than 1 just because this deck can sometimes get into the grind game, especially if your opponent tries to chip away at your things and then you're not able to OTK with Leo Dancer, then you need a second one just in case. And you do have so many ways to discard cards, so even if you draw it, it's not that big of a problem. For the extra deck, now I do play a lot of fusion monsters, which I know a lot of people aren't familiar with the deck just because they were used to the pure Xyz version, but I just feel like this deck is much more fun and right now much better being able to be played as a fusion deck because the Xyz, like I mentioned, with 1 Tiger, 1 Tanky, not consistent enough. So we have 2 copies of Cat Dancer. This card cannot be destroyed by battle, and by tributing a Lunalight, she can attack twice to every monster your opponent controls, dealing 100 burn every time she does, and dealing double the damage because you're going to attack that monster twice. So do not underestimate this card. This card can actually be summoned very easily because she only requires 2 Lunalight monsters, and if your opponent has a board that is not very strong, or if you try to play around their negates, if you combine this with something like Saber Dancer's Grave graveyard effect or blue cat's doubling effect, you can OTK just with this card. Leo Dancer is the card that's going to OTK most of the times, but that doesn't mean that you don't have other ways to win games, and this card is one of them. We also have 2 copies of Panther Dancer. This card is one that I don't summon often because it's here just to become material for Leo Dancer, because Leo Dancer requires a Panther Dancer and 2 other Lunalights. So this is one of the cards you're going to be sending with your Kaleidochick to the graveyard more often than not to be able to summon one of your 2 copies of Leo Dancer, and Leo Dancer is just absurd. This card cannot be targeted by card effects, it can be destroyed by card effects, it can attack twice, and when it battles, it's going to destroy all special summon monsters your opponent controls. If you combine this with Blue Cat, you get basically a 7,000 monster that can attack twice and board wipe your opponent that basically your opponent cannot touch. So this card is absolutely insane. When you try to use Blue Cat with this card, it just becomes so good and so fun, which is why I love Blue Cat, and I also play 1 copy of Saber Dancer to go with that. This card, mostly I use it for its grave effect. I send it to the grave if I'm going first with Kaleidochick, so I can then use it during the following turn to banish it to give 3,000 attack to one of my fusion monsters. But if you're going into a grind game and you have not sent her to the graveyard, it's a decent monster to summon because she's untargetable and she gains 200 attack for each of your beast warriors that are banished or in your graveyard. So she gains a lot of attack, especially during the late game. So she's a good card to summon. Unlike Panther Dancer, which is not that optimal to summon, this card is decent to summon, and she requires 3 any Lunalights, so she's much easier to summon than Panther Dancer. So she's a really good card, and I really enjoy playing her as a one. For the Xyz monsters, we have 1 copy of Tiger King. This card is an absolute must. This card, I cannot describe to you how important it is, especially now with 1 Tenki, because before, when you were drawing Tenki, sometimes summoning this card was awkward because you could set a second Tenki that you were not able to activate just because Tenki is once per turn. But now that Tenki is at 1, getting to this card feels even more rewarding than before because you're not going to draw this 1 Tenki very often, so getting access to it by any other means that's consistent is very good. And also its second effect to touch a material to basically skill drain all the monsters on the field that are not beast warriors is so important against a lot of matchups. I remember back in the day where we used this card against Thunder Dragons, and as long as you had something to chain on Titan, it was very easy to play around that board because you had this to basically negate all the Colossus and the Titan, and then you could just destroy them with Leo Dancer. This card is so good, and even to this day, in a going second deck, it's going to be very useful, so I cannot play this deck without this card. It's absolutely mandatory. We play 1 copy of Redoer. This card triggers the effects of the materials because it's not a cost to detach, so if you have Bird or if you have Martin under it, you can detach them, get their effects, and then you also have a monster on the field that can sometimes be a disruption, sometimes it can be a draw 1, but it's a very annoying monster to deal with nonetheless. And at the worst case scenario, it's just a beater that's very hard to deal with, so it's a really good card. We also play 1 copy of Evil Storm Nightmare. I do play some cards in case my opponent makes me go first. I would never go first willingly, even no matter what deck I'm playing against, especially now that Drytron got a very big hit, and I'm not sure if Drytron is even playable after this ban list, so it was the only deck that when you were going second against without any hand traps, it was basically impossible to play. But now that this deck is not as relevant anymore, I think even when you're playing going second, you can afford not to play any hand traps because you don't have any super type combo deck that you can basically lose instantly when you're playing against. So Nightmare is a really good card going first though, in case your opponent makes you go first. It's just a double Book of Moon, really good. Same thing with the 1 copy of Abyss Dweller. Against some matchups, if you know what your opponent is playing and you know that they lose to this card, then just summon it and get the free win. Against a lot of matchups, this card is just an auto win button. And for the Link monsters, we have 1 copy of Daruma Doll. I talked about this card, I talked about how amazing it is. It basically, it's a monster that has materials for Tri-Brigades. It requires Beast, Beast Warrior, O-Wing Beast monsters, and it's basically a break sword for spells and traps, so you can destroy one of your own and one of your opponents. And if it destroys a monster in battle, you can target one of your Beast, Beast Warrior, O-Wing Beast monsters that is banished on your graveyard and you add it back to your hand. So if you manage to run over something with this, then you also get a monster back. But the most important thing is to be able to pop your Perfumes, pop your Serenade Dance, pop your Tiger, destroy your opponent's backer as well, and get plus with your own cards. This card is ridiculous in the deck. We also play 1 copy of Pentestag. Sometimes I find that my opponents are trying their hardest to defend against Leo Dancer, but if they know what they're doing, they're going to summon all their monsters in defense mode just because they know how powerful my monsters can be. But with this card, you don't mind. You just summon this, you summon your Leo Dancer under it, and she just does piercing damage, which is another reason Saber Dancer and Blue Cat are so important, just because to make sure that you can OTK, especially when combined with cards like this. And we also play 1 copy of Nightmare Phoenix with 1 copy of Nightmare Unicorn. Just more cards to deal with other problematic cards. You don't need to play any Link 4s in this deck. It's not very easy to summon them, or it's not difficult, but it's not very optimal. You'd rather summon more Xyz monsters instead of using 4 monsters for a Link 4, and you don't need card like Boral Sword or Access Code to OTK with this deck. This deck has absolutely no trouble whatsoever destroying your opponent's life points instantly, so you don't need to rely on generic Link 4s like that to go for game. So yep, that's the deck, guys. I hope you enjoyed it because this is one of those decks that I really love, and now that Tiger is at 1, I plan on playing it a lot during the following format, even if it's not the most optimal deck to play, because I know that even if a deck is not considered to be very good, if your opponents don't really know what they're doing against it, then it's very easy easy to clutch out wins just like that with any type of road deck that is decent. And this is definitely one of them. So if you're a fan of the deck, I highly suggest trying it out again. If you just didn't think that it was good without Tiger, now it's actually really decent, and you're going to have a really good success if you just know exactly how to play this deck. So I highly recommend it. You're going to have a heck of a time playing this deck. It's very fun. So yep, that's the deck, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.